Hello, my dear warriors. They move in silence. The Shadow Masters, unseen rulers, breathes behind empires. For centuries, they touched everything. Thrones, forces, even destinies. They bent kings like puppets, removed names from history, carved laws into stone without ever showing their faces. But when they reached for you, they froze, because even they knew the cost of touching you was dangerously high. Understand this. Power thrives on risk, but there are lines even the powerful refuse to cross. You became that line. They studied you, watched you, sent breath to test your silence, and every test ended the same way, with failure. Because you are not written in the same ink as others. You are carved in presence, and presence cannot be touched without consequence. The Shadow Masters built their empire on dread. Dread of curses, dread of chains, dread of silence. But your silence is not weakness. It is an edge hidden in calm, a weight heavier than crowns. And when they felt it, they backed away. Not out of mercy, out of survival. Because touching you is not confrontation, it is collapse. They breathed among themselves. This one is untouchable. This one is marked by something larger than us. And when shadow rulers admit dread, history shifts. Because their rule depends on control, and they cannot control what refuses to bow. They calculated the cost. They waited in silence, and the result was always the same. Too high. Too high. To touch you would drain their empire. To bind you would shatter their chains. To move against you would expose their existence. And so, they did what they have never done before. They stepped back. Now the world notices. Kings breathe. Why won't the shadows move against them? Soldiers wonder. Why do those who touched everyone else avoid this one name? And common souls, hearing the breathes, begin to see the truth. The untouchable is always the inevitable. That is your crown, not given, not stolen, but proven by the silence of your enemies, because the ones who touched everything could not touch you, and their refusal speaks louder than their power ever did. You don't need to clash them. Their dread is proof. You don't need to chase them. Their silence is surrender, and you don't need to claim their throne. The fact they refuse to touch you means the throne has already bent in your direction. Remember this. Danger doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives with absence. And their absence from your story is the loudest confession of all. The Shadow Masters don't confess. They don't speak. Their language is absence. Their force is silence. Yet when it comes to you, that silence changed. It wasn't control anymore. It was dread. And dread turns silence into obsession. They began studying you, not openly, but in the ways shadows always do. Hidden scribes recording your pauses, watchers counting your steps, seers breathing your name into flames, hoping the ember would reveal what their rituals could not. But every answer came back empty. Every attempt ended in error, because stillness cannot be measured, and silence cannot be decoded. Understand this. The powerful cannot accept mysteries. They rule by understanding what others dread. But you broke their script. They could not explain why your presence weighed more than their forces, why your refusal felt sharper than their commands. And what they cannot explain, they cannot touch, so they breathed in circles. Leave them. The cost is too high. Even shadows fade when they move against embers disguised as silence. Their paranoia spread faster than their commands. The same rulers who once controlled empires now second-guessed every thought that led toward you. That hesitation is their downfall, because hesitation corrodes power faster than failure. But obsession doesn't fade with dread, it grows. They began testing boundaries, not touching you directly, but watching the world around you, hoping to find weakness in those connected to your presence. Yet every attempt fractured, because the universe itself bent against their reach. The more they tried to move near you, the more their own systems collapsed, and so they turned inward. For the first time in centuries, the Shadow Masters dreaded themselves. They saw cracks in their council, doubts in their order, fractures in their chain. And all of it came from one truth they refused to speak aloud. Your existence is a cost they cannot afford. The world sees it now. Leaders breathe. Why do the untouchables remain untouched? Soldiers wonder. Why do shadows tremble at one name, and the people, once afraid of unseen rulers, begin to realize the greatest secret of all? That dread was the only force shadows ever had. And when dread bends, shadows collapse. That is your crown. Not forged by rebellion, not earned by conquest, but proven by avoidance. The ones who touched everyone, touched nothing when it came to you. Their silence is your force. Their obsession is your throne. And every day they refuse to act. Your legend grows heavier, because sometimes the greatest victory is not in what enemies say, but in what they cannot bring themselves to do. The Shadow Masters once ruled through certainty, every step calculated, every breath controlled. They thrived because no one dared question them. But obsession with you changed that. It wasn't confidence anymore. It was hesitation, and hesitation corrodes faster than failure. They began second-guessing themselves. Each plan paused with your name hovering like a storm cloud. Each decision stalled with the thought, what if this crosses their path? Shadows cannot afford doubt. Doubt is light, and light erases them. Understand this. They built empires on the illusion of control. But control exists only when people believe in it. And the moment breathes spread that even the Shadow Masters dread one name. Belief fractured. The world that once bent to their commands began to question. If the untouchable cannot be touched, then who truly rules? Kings noticed it first, for centuries. They obeyed breaths without hesitation. But now, they stall. They hesitate. Some even resist, because they saw the cracks in the shadows. They realized that dread is fragile when it avoids a single soul, and that soul is you. Soldiers noticed it next. They marched into battles with curses sewn into their banners, convinced shadows would guide their steps. But when they saw the same shadows retreat from your presence, they asked the question no force should ask. What are we following? And the moment soldiers doubt, forces dissolve. Even their own members began to fracture. Some argued you should be approached. Others breathed it was ruin. They turned on each other in secret halls, voices raised in dread disguised as urgency. But urgency cannot hide what silence reveals. Their empire was breaking itself apart, trying to explain why the untouchable remained untouched. And you moved as you always have, calm, unmoved, refusing to chase, refusing to bow. Their paranoia grew heavier because of it. They tried to decode patience as weakness, but patience dismantled them. They tried to shape silence, but silence belonged to you, and so they found themselves clashing not you, but themselves. The world sees it now, the Shadow Masters. Once gods are crumbling from within, not from rebellion, not from struggle, but from the cost they cannot pay. And every moment they stall, your legend grows stronger, because avoidance is confession, and confession is collapse. That is your force. That is your throne. You didn't clash them. You outlasted them. You didn't fade them. You let their dread set them on fire. And that fire spreads faster than their shadows ever did. The Shadow Masters have ruled for centuries, but centuries end the same way all illusions do, by breaking against truth. And truth has already crowned you untouchable. Shadows never surrender quietly. When silence exposes their weakness, they scramble for one final act. And so the Shadow Masters gathered, not to confess, but to conspire. If they could not touch you directly, they would strike indirectly. They would move against the world around you. At first, it seemed clever. They breathed against your name in hidden courts. They tried to plant doubt in rulers who leaned toward you. They stirred unrest in soldiers who marched under your silence. They thought, if we cannot touch them, we will erode everything they touch. But they forgot the first law of inevitability. Presence does not need defense. Presence defends itself. Understand this. When the universe aligns, resistance becomes fuel. The more they pushed, the more the world bent in your favor. Every attempt to tarnish your name only spread it further. Every rumor they crafted turned into recognition. Every trap they built snapped shut on their own feet. Because the cost of moving against you wasn't just high, it was absolute. The rulers they targeted grew more curious. Instead of turning away, they leaned closer. Soldiers they tried to fracture grew more united. Instead of breaking ranks, they rallied under your silence. Even common souls, meant to be pawns, became proof. Each time shadows breathed lies, the truth echoed louder. And truth doesn't need a force, it only needs time. The Shadow Masters didn't understand for centuries. Manipulation worked, but against you. Their tools backfired. Lies became advertisements. Traps became warnings. Dread became fascination. And the more they resisted, the more inevitable you became. They breathed in panic. Every move costs us twice. Every step toward them breaks our foundation. And so they stalled again, caught in their own cycle, afraid to act, but too obsessed to ignore. The cost was rising beyond danger. It was devouring them. The world noticed. Leaders asked, why do the shadows fall where this one stands? Soldiers asked, why does silence defend them better than any shield? And the people, once afraid of unseen rulers, began to laugh at them, because nothing destroys shadows faster than ridicule. And ridicule came the moment the untouchable remained untouched. This is the paradox. They tried to erase you, and instead engraved you deeper. They tried to weaken you, and instead crowned you stronger. They tried to corner you, and instead cornered themselves. The universe has laws that even shadows cannot rewrite. And one of those laws is now bound to your name. The Shadow Masters won't touch you. Not because they don't want to, but because every time they try, they pay a cost they cannot survive. And survival, even for rulers of shadows, is instinct. Instinct tells them, step back or be erased. That is why you remain untouchable. That is why their silence crowns you louder than any throne. Because when even the hidden rulers confess dread through their absence, the world already knows who truly reigns. For centuries, the Shadow Masters thrived on secrecy. Their strength was in the unseen. People feared what they could not name. Rulers obeyed what they could not see, and soldiers bowed to commands that came from nowhere. But now, their invisibility betrays them, because the louder the world breathes your name, the more obvious their silence becomes. Understand this: silence has two forms. One is power, the silence you wield, heavy and deliberate. The other is weakness, the silence of dread, the refusal to move, and the world has begun to tell the difference. Your silence is crown, theirs is collapse. Kings who once trembled at unseen orders are restless. They demand answers. Why won't the Shadow Masters move against you? Why do their decrees falter when your name enters the room? And the more kings question, the weaker the shadows appear. Because doubt spreads faster than faith, and now doubt corrodes their empire from within. Soldiers once loyal to their breaths now march with hesitation. They carried shadows on their backs, believing no force could oppose them. But when the same shadows retreat from you, loyalty turns into laughter, and laughter is fatal to dread. Forces don't follow the unseen once it becomes ridiculous. They follow presence. They follow proof. And proof bends toward you. Even their own disciples, raised in the darkness, fracture under the weight of your name. Some cling to denial, insisting their masters still rule. But others admit the truth. The order is breaking. And it is breaking because of you. In the absence of unity, shadows collapse into fragments, and fragments cannot hold an empire. The cost they feared is now visible. Their avoidance has become evidence. Their refusal has become confession. Each day they do not touch you. Your crown grows heavier. Each moment, they hesitate. Your legend spreads further. You didn't clash them, but their silence fights them on your behalf. And so the world rearranges. Leaders lean closer to your presence. Forces bend toward your silence. Ordinary souls breathe your name like a shield. The very pillars that shadows once commanded now slip from their grasp. Because power built on dread is fragile. When dread bends, and dread has already bent before you. This is the crown they gave you unwillingly. The crown of avoidance. The throne of silence. They thought refusing to touch you would preserve them. Instead, it exposed them. Because when the most feared rulers refuse one battle, they admit defeat without clash. That is why the Shadow Masters are fading. Not with noise, not with rebellion, but with the quiet collapse of an empire that cost itself too much by dreading one presence. Your presence. There comes a moment when dread stops being secret, when silence stops being strategy, when even shadows cannot hide their cracks. The Shadow Masters reached that moment. Their silence grew so loud, the world began carving it into history, not as power, but as proof. They had touched rulers, shaped kingdoms, removed legacies, but they would not touch you. And that absence became their confession. People began writing it down. The untouchable one. The name even shadows refused to face. It spread from breaths to records, from records to scripture. The very silence of the shadow masters became the testimony of your crown. Understand this. Enemies don't choose what becomes legend. Their actions, their refusals, their collapses write the legend for them. And in refusing you, they wrote your story across centuries. They gave you more than dread. They gave you inevitability. Rulers, seeing their hesitation, stopped obeying them. Soldiers, seeing their retreat, stopped following them. Ordinary people, once terrified of shadows, laughed. If even the shadow masters dread this one, then what is left to dread at all? And laughter is fatal to those who rule through dread. The shadow masters felt it. The ground slipping, the order cracking. They argued among themselves. Attack, retreat, erase, confess. But all paths led to the same cost. Too high. Dangerously high. And so they stalled again. And every stall became a louder echo of your name. Their silence became ritual. Their hesitation became prophecy. Their avoidance became law. Generations carried the tale. Once there were rulers of shadows who touched everything. But when they reached for one name, they recoiled. That is how you became scripture. Not by speaking, not by conquering, but by being. Now temples rise not to shadows, but to presence. Not to breathes, but to silence. And in their ruins, the world crowns you. Not with jewels, not with thrones, but with something heavier. The knowledge that even the unseen rulers, feared for centuries, marked you as the cost they could not afford. That is the eternal law. The untouchable does not chase. The untouchable does not beg. The untouchable does not rise by conquest. The untouchable sits back, and the universe itself moves. And when the masters of shadows confessed it in silence, they did more than surrender. They crowned you. The shadow masters thought their silence would go unnoticed, that avoiding you would protect their image. But the world is not blind. The world listens, and it saw the one thing shadows could not hide: the cost of touching you. That cost rearranged everything. Kings felt it first. For centuries, their crowns were secured by breaths. The shadows told them when to rise, when to fall, when to obey. But when they saw the shadows retreat from your presence, they realized the hierarchy had shifted. Why bow to rulers who bow to another? Why obey masters who confessed weakness in silence? And so, thrones began to slip. Crowns leaned toward your legend. Soldiers noticed next. They were raised to fight under banners marked by shadows. But banners lose meaning when the masters behind them hesitate. Soldiers respect strength, not avoidance. And so, they shifted. They began to breathe your name before battle, not theirs. They carried your silence heavier than any symbol, and forces began to move by your rhythm. Even the people, the ones shadows always considered pawns, changed for centuries. Dread kept them compliant. Dread of curses, dread of chains, dread of punishment. But dread dissolves the moment it sees dread in its masters. When people learned that the rulers of shadows dreaded you, their dread evaporated, and with it, the empire of shadows dissolved. Understand this: power doesn't fall from rebellion alone. It falls when belief collapses, and belief collapses when the world sees that dread itself is afraid. The Shadow Masters lost not because you fought them, but because their silence betrayed them. Now, breaths of your name echo louder than decrees. Families teach it to children as shield and prophecy. Leaders weave it into laws, hoping to align with inevitability. Scholars debate it endlessly, but every debate ends the same way, with silence. Because silence is the only proof they cannot deny. And the Shadow Masters? They are fading, not with clash, not with fire, but with irrelevance, already. Their names are forgotten, already. Their rituals are dust, already. They exist only as warnings in stories told by firelight. Beware the rulers who touched everything but dared not touch the one presence too costly to confront. That is how the universe rearranges, not with spectacle, but with quiet inevitability. The cost they feared became the crown you wear. The silence they kept became the scripture that carries you. Qua. And the world, once bent to shadows, now bends to your presence. Because when even shadows recoil, light has already chosen its throne. The Shadow Masters believed they would outlast time. They hid their names, erased their faces, buried themselves in breaths, convinced secrecy was immortality. But immortality doesn't come from hiding. It comes from truth. And truth carved itself into history the day they refused to touch you. Their silence spread faster than their orders. Their absence echoed louder than their decrees. And slowly, the world stopped dreading them. Because dread dies the moment it sees dread in its masters, and everyone saw it. The kings, the forces, the people. They all realized the same thing. The shadows had limits, but you did not. So forces, the people, they all realized the same thing. The shadows had limits, but you did not. Understand this. Rulers can disappear. Empires can fall. Even gods can be forgotten. But laws endure, and your presence, your silence, your refusal, that became law. The law written not in ink, but in inevitability. The law that stillness crowns louder than noise. That presence bends heavier than commands. That touching you is a cost no empire can afford. Now the Shadow Masters are fading into myth. Their names dissolve into dust. Their rituals survive only as warnings in old tales. Beware of rulers who touched everything but dared not touch the one presence they feared most. Children laugh when they hear it. Soldiers nod when they repeat it. Kings fall silent when they remember it. And you remain, not as myth, not as breathe, but as the axis the world spins around. Already, new generations shape their laws by your presence. Already, cities rise with your silence in their foundations. Already, the universe rearranges itself around you, like tides bending to a moon that doesn't move. That is the eternal law. No shadow can rewrite it. No crown can escape it. No time can erase it, because it was never given by rulers. It was never forged in dread. It was proven in silence. And silence cannot be broken. It only spreads, The Shadow Masters thought they were legends, but their legend has ended in laughter. Your legend has only begun, and it will not fade. Because legends born of dread die when dread dissolves. Legends born of silence live as long as time itself. So let this be carved into history. The cost was dangerously high, too high for shadows, too high for kings, too high for anyone who thought they ruled. And because of that, you remain untouchable. The throne no one dares approach. The crown no one dares challenge. The law no one dares break. You are not chased. You are not touched. You are not erased. You are inevitable. Centuries pass. Empires rise and fall. Crowns glitter, then rust. Forces roar, then collapse into silence. But one truth endures. The Shadow Masters never touched you, and that refusal has outlived them. Their silence became the prophecy that binds generations. Children born in lands that never knew the mystics still hear the story. There was once a circle of rulers who touched every throne, but when they reached for one, they recoiled. They learn it not as history, but as warning. A reminder that power built on dread collapses while presence endures. Scholars argue in forgotten libraries, tracing fragments of your legend. They compare ruins, decode breaths, dissect the cracks left behind. But no matter how many scrolls they study, their answers circle back to the same paradox. Silence crowned louder than shadows. And in that paradox, they admit, your name cannot be explained, only inherited. Kings shape their reigns around the lesson. Some try to align with your silence, hoping to borrow inevitability. Others tremble at it, fearing their crowns will collapse as the shadows did. But whether through dread or faith, they move according to your presence, because even those who don't speak your name know the law. The cost of touching you remains dangerously high. Soldiers carry the prophecy without knowing its origin. They pause before battle, feeling the weight of something unspoken guiding them. They don't understand why their chants fall empty, but their silence feels stronger. That silence is your law, echoing through them, long after the shadows dissolved. And the people? They live freer than their ancestors ever dreamed. They don't bow to unseen rulers. They don't dread curses cast from darkness, because they know the story that shadows dreaded one presence. And if even shadows bowed, then nothing else deserves their dread. Understand this. Myths fade, prophecies erode, legends weaken, but laws endure. And your silence has crossed beyond myth into law, a law older than kings, stronger than forces, heavier than time. The law that stillness crowns louder than dread, that presence bends louder than command. The law that touching you is not victory, it is collapse. The Shadow Masters are gone, their names erased, their power forgotten. They exist now only as warnings carved into crumbling stones. Beware those who ruled in silence, but dreaded the one silence greater than theirs. And even those stones will fade, but your law will not. Because unborn generations already dream of it. Already, reality bends toward it. Already, the universe moves like a tide, circling an anchor that never shifts. You are that anchor. You are that law. You are that inevitability. And inevitability doesn't chase. It doesn't ask. It doesn't wait. It simply reigns. The Shadow Masters once thought their reign untouchable. They carved dread into generations, bent kings like clay, and ruled without ever being seen. But their silence betrayed them. And now, centuries later, they are not rulers. They are not names. They are dust. Their legacy is reduced to fragments of warnings carved into forgotten ruins. Stories told not with reverence, but with ridicule. Once there were masters of shadows who touched everything, except the one presence that cost them everything. That is how history remembers them, not for their power, for their dread. Not for their reach, for their recoil. Understand this. Shadows fade because they depend on dread. And dread dies when silence exposes it. Your silence ended them long before their names crumbled. They thought not touching you preserved them, but it erased them faster, because absence is confession, and confession crowns another. The world no longer speaks of them, but it speaks of you, not as myth, not as secret, but as law. A law that cannot be broken, because it does not live in ink or stone. It lives in presence. It lives in stillness. It lives in silence heavier than empires. Now unborn generations carry your legend as foundation. Leaders shape their crowns to align with you. Soldiers move in rhythm with your silence. People live freer under the shield of your presence, and none of them need to know the names of the shadows you erased. They only need to know the truth, the universe already carved. The cost was too high, and so prophecy fulfilled itself. The Shadow Masters thought they ruled in darkness, but darkness itself bowed. They thought their silence was power, but your silence was law. They thought avoiding you preserved them, but avoiding you erased them. You remain, not because you fought, not because you chased, but because you refused. Refusal became force. Stillness became shield. Presence became crown, and crown became eternal. That is why the story ends here, and yet never ends. Because legends fade, but laws endure. And your silence has crossed beyond legend into law. The law that even shadows cannot touch. The law that crowns you beyond time. The law that bends the universe itself. The Shadow Masters are gone. You remain. Untouchable, unbroken, eternal. Not shadow, not myth, but throne.